Ximena Torres, at just 22 years old, had already lived more than most people would ever experience. Born and raised in the dusty back alleys and slums of Culiacan, she learned early on that power and danger walked hand in hand. Her life changed drastically after crossing paths with El Jaguar, a charismatic man, but with eyes that reflected the coldness of a predator who co-opted her into the highest ranks of his faction. She fell in love not only with the man, but with the promise of a life without the deprivations of her childhood, a world of luxury and an illusion of security. Her journey, from a naive young woman to a trusted messenger, is proof of how circumstances can mold a person's destiny. If this story about someone's awakening and struggle touches you in any way, please subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And tell me in the comments what city you're following this story from, so we can continue to share stories like Ximena's. Life alongside El Jaguar was a toxic mixture of opulence and terror. Ximena became accustomed to the sumptuous dinners where danger was the dessert, and the opulent parties where fake smiles hid sharp knives. She became the perfect messenger, a silent shadow who transported crucial information and, at times, briefcases filled with money and weapons, crossing the city without raising suspicion. For Ximena, it was a life of distorted fairy tales, a dangerous dream, where the prince was a monster and the castle was a gilded cage. The trust he placed in her was her greatest honor, proof that she was different, special. But what she didn't realize was that this trust was just a thin rope, ready to snap at any moment, revealing the brutal fall that would follow. Ximena's status came not only from her loyalty, but from her astuteness. She had learned to read between the lines, to decipher glances, and to anticipate danger. Her position as a high-trust messenger placed her at the center of the faction's web, hearing whispers and seeing secrets that most people couldn't even imagine. This proximity to power made her see the organization's true face, a universe of cruelty and unbridled ambition that was slowly consuming her. Deep down, she knew that this glamorous world was built on the suffering of others, a truth that tormented her silently. Ximena, the girl who dreamed of escaping poverty, found herself entangled in a net from which there seemed to be no escape, with a heavy conscience for every package she delivered and every secret she kept. The seed of doubt began to sprout when Ximena witnessed the terror that the faction inflicted on the families of their enemies. The tears of the children, the pain of the innocent, the brutality imposed without remorse. She could no longer ignore the weight of her actions. A shipment of weapons, which would be used to terrorize a community, was the catalyst for her decision. The conflict between her loyalty to El Jaguar and her moral conscience became unbearable. She saw herself trapped between blind loyalty and the need to do what was right, even if it cost her life. With every step she took in favor of the faction, a part of her soul shattered, and the vision of a future with El Jaguar turned into a nightmare. The turning point came when Ximena discovered that the next shipment would be used to attack a rival group that, unbeknownst to her, was led by her older cousin, a father figure who had protected her throughout her childhood. The loyalty she felt for the faction vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold terror and the urgent need to protect the only blood tie she had left. Determined, she devised a risky plan to leak the information, believing that the shipment's delivery would be aborted and thus save her cousin's life. She knew she was playing with fire, but the hope of saving an innocent life, and that of her family member, was stronger than the fear of the consequences. Panic consumed her when the note, with the exact location of the shipment, fell from her purse onto the marble floor of El Jaguar's mansion. The subtle sound of the paper falling sounded like a gunshot. El Jaguar's cold eyes fixed on her. There was no more love or affection in his gaze, just blatant betrayal. Ximena tried to stammer an excuse, but the words died in her throat. The mask of the man she loved fell away, revealing the ruthless face of a bloody leader, ready to punish the slightest insubordination. He approached slowly, picked up the note, and with a cruel smile on his lips, folded it carefully. The betrayal was a punch to the gut, but El Jaguar's indifference was the knife that twisted in the wound. He didn't ask for a reason. He didn't try to understand. His only concern was the threat to his authority. The room, once full of laughter and music, transformed into a silent court. He judged her right there, without witnesses, without the right to a defense. His empty gaze conveyed the sentence. "You know what happens to traitors, Ximena," he whispered, his voice so soft that the phrase seemed even more deadly. Ximena's tears rolled down, not from fear, but from the pain of a love that proved to be a brutal farce, a perverse fairy tale that ended there, violently. 3 henchmen grabbed her and dragged her outside, putting her in a dark car. The last image Ximena had of El Jaguar was his expressionless face. She begged for her life, screaming that he had been her only family, that she hadn't meant any harm. But the words were like echoes in the desert of his indifference. He just watched her from a distance, as if the scene were from an unimportant movie. The trip was long and silent, culminating in an arid and forgotten desert, a perfect place to disappear forever. A place where the last sight she would have of life would be the starry sky, and the only sound would be the muffled screams of her own terror. The hole in the ground, dug by one of the men, looked like an abyss ready to swallow. Everything she was, and everything she could be. The thud of the shovel against the earth was the first sound Ximena heard. The men brutally pushed her into the shallow hole, a makeshift grave that reeked of wet dirt and imminent death. She struggled, her eyes full of tears of terror and desperation, but her screams were muffled by one of the henchmen who, with a cruel smile, held her firmly. The darkness of the hole swallowed her, and the feeling of claustrophobia overcame her. The space was tight, barely allowing her to move. The voices of the henchmen became distant, and the muffled sound of the dirt falling on her was the only melody left. It was as if the whole world was being silenced, and she was the only one hearing the sound of her own end. The first shovel of dirt fell onto her body with a heavy sound, filling the air with particles that lodged in her mouth and nose. Ximena tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out, just a muffled, suffocating sound. The dirt, damp and cold, piled up on her, weighing on her chest and legs. With each shovel of dirt that came, the air became scarcer. She struggled, trying to move her arms to create a small space, but it was useless. The panic was absolute, a monster that consumed her from the inside out. Images of her childhood, the laughter with her cousin, the promise of a better future, everything flashed through her mind, while the weight of the earth slowly crushed her. At the height of her dread, one of the men, a henchman of El Jaguar known for his unquestionable loyalty, hesitated for a second. He was the same person who, years ago, had rescued her from a dangerous situation in the slum, bringing her to the care of El Jaguar. He felt a flash of compassion for the girl he had once sworn to protect, and it was in that split second that he buried her in a way that, if she had enough strength, she might have a small chance of getting out. He left a small pocket of air over her face and did not compact the dirt, allowing a minimal space for her to fight. The action was almost imperceptible, a final act of kindness in a cruel world. Hours passed, the desert sun burning the earth above her. The oxygen began to run low. Ximena's mind, previously in a panic, was invaded by a cold and implacable rage. She would not die there. Not after everything. The terror gave way to a brute force, a visceral determination. With the little air she had left, she pushed, using every ounce of strength in her body, dirt above her head. Her nails broke, the skin of her arms tore, but she kept going. Slowly, a crack appeared above her, a sliver of light. Hope resurfaced, fueling her fury. She dug, moved, pushed until, finally, the sunlight blinded her. She emerged from the earth like a ghost, covered in dirt, her eyes red and her throat hoarse from screaming. The claustrophobia still haunted her, but the feeling of pure air in her lungs was the greatest victory. She looked at the desert, immense and empty. She was alone, with nothing, but alive. It was there, in that moment of resurrection, that revenge became her only goal. She would no longer run, she would take revenge. That punch to the gut was just the beginning, and she would return the blow in a way that would break every bone of the one who betrayed her. And the lesson is simple. If you're trying to be just, and you fail, the only thing left for you is to take justice into your own hands. It was there that I decided it would be this way. And for that reason, I will never stop. The scorching desert sun beat down relentlessly on Ximena. Dehydration and exhaustion consumed her, turning her vengeance into an almost inaudible whisper. She staggered for miles, the soles of her feet wounded, her mouth dry, and her mind haunted by the earth that had almost swallowed her. With every step, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, the solitude crushing her, the certainty that she was alone against an army of predators. Mirages danced in front of her, false promises of water and shade. Revenge, which was once a furious flame, now seemed like a distant dream, a lost cause. She felt like a dry leaf carried by the wind, about to disintegrate. When Ximena's strength was fading, an old dusty pickup truck stopped beside her. The driver, a middle-aged man with a face marked by life and tired eyes, looked at her with suspicion. It was Marcos, a former member of the faction who had become disillusioned with the violence now, working as an informant for a journalist. He initially thought about ignoring her, but something in her expression, the wild look and the dirt that covered her, told him that this was no simple victim of the desert. She looked at him with the same eyes as a cornered animal, ready to flee or attack. The distrust was mutual, but Ximena's need for survival was greater than her fear. Marcos took her to a small, isolated cabin a few miles from the site. He gave her water and food while observing. The wound on her arm, the same wound he, in the past, had bandaged. He looked at her with the coldness of someone who knows violence. The cabin, Spartan and modest, was a paradise for her, a safe haven away from El Jaguar's bloody opulence. The silence of that place seemed like a blessing. She watched him as he prepared the food, realizing that despite his rough appearance, there was a hidden humanity there, a spark of kindness that surprised her. Ximena, amidst sobs, began to tell her story, revealing her identity. Marcos listened to her with the patience of someone who has already seen and heard everything. With every detail of her account, the pain and anger became more evident. She explained the betrayal, the live burial, and the thirst for revenge that now consumed her. At first he seemed skeptical, but the emotion in her words was too raw to be false. He then revealed himself to be a former henchman of El Jaguar, who fled after the death of his brother. The journalist he worked for convinced him to become a source for a book about the faction. Marcos, who watched Ximena's pain intently, revealed that he was the one responsible for her burial. He confessed with a choked voice that, in a flash of remorse, he didn't compact the dirt, so she would have a chance to survive. "I didn't want any more deaths on my hands, Ximena," he whispered. The pain in his eyes was genuine. In that moment, Ximena's revenge against El Jaguar's henchman dissipated. The man in front of her was not the enemy, but an unlikely ally. She saw the chance to have her revenge, and the decision was made. After that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. My life became a journey, my mission. If you're here with me, it's because you believe in my struggle. That's why you should subscribe and strengthen our connection. Together, we will break the system that destroyed me. From that point on, they began a silent investigation. Marcos had a network of contacts and information that was the key to Ximena's survival. They met with informants, former faction members, and even dissidents. Ximena, with her astuteness, was fundamental to deciphering the secrets and flaws of El Jaguar's system. The puzzle began to come together, revealing the path to revenge. Each piece fit perfectly, and Ximena's vengeance, which was once a small flame, now transformed into a bonfire of hatred and determination. The search for information was dangerous, and the fear of being discovered was constant. On a rainy night, while investigating a faction warehouse, they were surprised by a patrol. They hid in a dark alley, the sound of footsteps approaching. Ximena's heart beat in her chest like a drum, and the claustrophobia overcame her. She felt the alley walls closing in, the smell of dirt, the darkness. Marcos held her and whispered for her to breathe. "You're not in the hole, Ximena. You're here, with me," he said. His voice was an anchor for her sanity. She forced herself to concentrate, and the patrol passed without noticing them. With each claustrophobia attack, Ximena became stronger, learning to deal with the fear instead of being dominated by it. Marcos helped her face her demons, telling his own story of trauma and overcoming. He was the moral counterpoint she needed, the reminder that revenge wasn't the only thing that mattered. He taught her to see violence not as a solution, but as a burden. Their relationship evolved from an alliance of convenience to a deep friendship based on loyalty and shared pain. They became the only family they had for each other. After weeks of investigation, they discovered El Jaguar's great weakness. He had become involved in a corruption operation with an influential politician to expand his influence to other cities. They found that he had used his money and power to buy the loyalty of faction members. They found a hidden ledger that detailed every transaction and every betrayal, which would be the proof they needed to break the system. The book was in the possession of an ally of El Jaguar. Ximena's anger turned into fury when she discovered the traitor. It was her best friend, Isabella, who had sold her friendship and loyalty in exchange for security and a handful of money. The news was a punch to the gut, a pain that was even deeper than El Jaguar's betrayal. She remembered all the secrets she had shared with Isabella, all the confidences, all the moments she had trusted in her loyalty. The pain of the betrayal mixed with the rage of knowing that Isabella had handed her over to death. They tracked Isabella to a nightclub. The loud music and strobe lights created an atmosphere of tension. Ximena confronted her in a private area of the club. The tension between the two was palpable. "Why, Isabella? Why?" Ximena whispered, the pain in her eyes sharper than a knife. Isabella initially tried to deny it, but the proof Ximena had in hand unmasked her. The friend apologized, revealing that El Jaguar had blackmailed her, using her family as a hostage. The regret in her eyes was real, but Ximena's pain was too deep to be healed by an apology. Ximena, who had previously thought about killing Isabella, realized that revenge would not make her feel better. She remembered Marcos's words and decided to use Isabella's information to take down El Jaguar. She convinced her to help her invade the mansion in exchange for security and the promise that her family would not be harmed. Isabella hesitated, but Ximena's determination was undeniable. The pain of the betrayal transformed into a weapon, a tool to take down the man who had destroyed them. With Isabella's help, they devised a plan to invade El Jaguar's mansion during the faction's annual party. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to catch El Jaguar by surprise. They would use Isabella to divert the security's attention, and Ximena would infiltrate to get the ledger. The plan was risky, but they were ready to pay the price. The tension of the moment was so great that the air seemed to have become denser, a premonition of what was to come. And it was in that moment that I felt ready. The journey strengthened me. If you also feel you need a change, a motivation, subscribe to the channel. Help me tell more stories like this. Let's go on this journey together. They spent the following week preparing. Marcos got the mansion's blueprints, and they studied the location of the security cameras. They found the hiding place of the ledger, a safe in El Jaguar's private office. With each step of the plan, the tension increased, but Ximena's determination was unshakable. She remembered El Jaguar's face, his indifference, and the anger transformed into a motor that propelled her. The night before the party, Ximena and Marcos had a moment of silence. Marcos tried to convince her to just leave, to start a new life, But Ximena knew she couldn't run away. Revenge was her only chance at peace. "I can't run, Marcos. I need to do this. I won't be the victim anymore," she said, her voice full of determination. He, in turn, accepted her decision and just hugged her, supporting her. That silent hug was proof that the friendship they had built was stronger than revenge. On the night of the party, Ximena dressed as a high-class woman, a designer dress and discreet makeup, to blend in with the crowd. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize her own reflection. The naive girl had died, and in her place was a relentless woman, with eyes that reflected the coldness of a predator. The transformation was complete, and she was ready for war. That was the last step in her journey. El Jaguar's party was a celebration of wealth and power. The atmosphere was opulent, with LED lights, champagne, and women in designer dresses. Ximena blended in with the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest, trying at all costs not to be noticed. The laughter, the conversations, the sound of ice clinking against whiskey glasses, all of it was like a strange music, an echo of the world that had betrayed her. She felt like a shadow, invisible amidst so much glitter. Ximena and Marcos, who dressed as a security guard, navigated through the crowd. He guided her through the corridors, helping her avoid the most dangerous henchmen. The tension was constant, but Ximena's determination was unshakable. She was in his house, and she was about to take down the monster who had created and hurt her. She felt invincible, a force of nature. In the distance, she saw El Jaguar in his designer suit, surrounded by henchmen and politicians. He was on his throne, the king of a world of violence. He laughed, toasted, and didn't even notice her. The irony of the situation was painful, and Ximena's vengeance grew even stronger. She was there, a few feet from her enemy, and he didn't even know that his own death was approaching. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and the temperature of that place was just right. They approached El Jaguar, disguised, and managed to get his attention. Marcos, subtly, convinced him that there was a problem in the office. El Jaguar, who didn't think twice, followed him. On the way, the tension was palpable. Ximena, who was close by, saw an opportunity to act, while Marcos distracted him. One of the henchmen, however, recognized her. His look of disdain turned into astonishment. He made a move to call out to her, but Marcos's hand stopped him. "What are you doing?" "A man," he whispered. "That's Ximena, the girl El Jaguar buried," the henchman replied. Marcos, acting quickly, pushed him against a wall, suffocating him until he lost consciousness. He looked at Ximena and guided her to continue. She then continued on her journey. She felt like a ghost haunting her own past. She used her old skills as a messenger to move through the shadows. With each step, she became stronger, more confident. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. Ximena's vengeance was at its peak. When she finally reached the office, Ximena's heart pounded. She saw the safe, her proof of revenge. She entered the password, which was El Jaguar's mother's birthday. He had confided the password to her, a final sign of his false trust. The safe opened, and she took the ledger. She held it in her hands, and the weight of the revenge made her feel strong. She, with the ledger in her hands, headed for the large screen in the center of the hall. She connected to the system, and images of El Jaguar's crimes, the financial transactions, the names of the corrupt politicians, all of it was projected on the large screen. To everyone's surprise, the music stopped. Silence reigned. El Jaguar's face, who was returning to the scene, turned white. His facade of power was crumbling, and he, for the first time in his life, felt the bitter taste of fear. Ximena's revenge was revealed to the world. Chaos began to take over the party. The high-class guests tried to run away. The security, in a panic, tried to cover up the situation. The politicians, desperate, tried to flee. El Jaguar, however, remained paralyzed, looking at the screen. "I can't believe you're alive," he whispered to Ximena, who was in front of him. I am living proof that it's possible to rise again, and I don't want my journey to end here. I want my story to be an example. If you give me strength, if you believe, subscribe to the channel so we can continue to build this story. It's your strength that makes me go on. El Jaguar's face went white. He was more shocked by her decision than by the threat of death. His ruin was sealed. He saw himself defeated, not by a gunshot, but by Ximena's humanity. His defeat was complete. He, the king of violence, had been defeated by a woman who refused to be like him. His defeat was a fatal blow to his ego, and his defeat was Ximena's triumph. The police sirens, which had been called by the informants, approached. El Jaguar, who was paralyzed, was caught by surprise. The police handcuffed him, taking him to the station. He looked at Ximena with hatred in his eyes, but she no longer felt it. The revenge had been consumed, and she was free. She looked at the sky, the same sky that had seen her die, and felt at peace. Justice may not taste like revenge, but it has the power to free, and my choice freed me. If you are inspired by my story, subscribe so we can continue to build a better future for everyone. Ximena turned and walked away from the crime scene. The party continued, but the glitter had been replaced by chaos. People ran, police tried to control the situation, but Ximena didn't care. Her journey was over. The revenge had been done, and she was at peace. The pain still existed, but it was a scar, a memory of her old life. She was a new woman, and she was ready to start over. Hours after the chaos, Ximena and Marcos were in a safe place. Silence was the only melody left, a heavy but comforting silence. She looked at her hands, which were once covered in dirt, now clean, but still carrying the memory of the whole. The weight of revenge had been replaced by a deep exhaustion and a quiet relief. Justice, she realized, didn't have the same taste as revenge, but it had the power to heal. Marcos looked at her with admiration. The man who had buried her now saw her as a living legend, a woman who had risen from the dead to take revenge. Ximena looked at the night sky of Culiacan and remembered the naive girl who dreamed of escaping poverty. She didn't feel like the same person. Revenge had transformed her, hardened her, but also freed her. The pain still existed, but it was no longer the same. It was a scar, a reminder of the past, but it no longer defined her. Revenge, she realized, was only the beginning of her journey. The real journey would be to rebuild her life, to find a new purpose. She was no longer the victim, but the survivor. Her journey was over. The revenge had been done, and now it was time to start over. She turned to Marcos and hugged him, grateful. My journey was long and painful, but it was worth it. Revenge changed me, but justice freed me. If this story inspired you, if it made you think, subscribe, so we can continue to share stories of struggle, hope, and overcoming. Your strength propels us. Marcos, who had become her greatest ally, now had the chance to start over. With the fall of El Jaguar, he freed himself from his past and could live in peace with his family. Isabella, who had betrayed Ximena, was helped to escape and now had the chance to rebuild her life. Justice was not limited to Ximena's revenge. It spread like a wave of hope, touching the lives of all who had been affected by El Jaguar's tyranny. Ximena got up and dressed in simple clothes. She picked up a small suitcase and prepared to leave. She was no longer Ximena Torres, the girl from Culiacan. She was a legend, a ghost of the past who refused to be forgotten. She left. The city, the morning light greeting her. She was free and ready for a new beginning. Her journey had ended, but her story, the story of the woman who rose from the grave, had only just begun.